If God does not exist, then sin and guilt are illusions. Rather than showing us to be accountable to a personal creator, naturalism leaves one accountable merely to the laws of nature. While there are rewards and punishments with God, there are only consequences with nature. In fact, if naturalism is true, we cannot even speak of sin, because sin implies that an offense has been committed against a person, ultimately the person of God. But naturalism tells us that God does not exist, and that other humans are merely cogs in nature's wheel. To talk about sinning against nature makes no sense. If naturalism is true, we can live whichever way we choose. Our choices may have consequences, but whatever we can get away with is fair game. Many people view such a move as liberating. The biblical writers see it as idolatry. Aldous Huxley, in his book Ends and Means, an inquiry into the nature of ideals into the methods employed for their realization, once wrote, "For myself, as no doubt for most of my contemporaries, the philosophy of meaninglessness was essentially an instrument of liberation. The liberation we desired was simultaneously liberating from a certain political and economic system, and liberation from a certain system of morality. We objected to the morality because it interfered with our sexual freedom. We objected to the political and economic system because it was unjust. The supporters of this system claimed that in some way they embodied the meaning, a Christian meaning, they insisted, of the world. There was one admirably simple method of confuting these people and at the same time justifying ourselves in our political and erotical revolt. We could deny that the world had any meaning whatsoever." When we look at the Old Testament and we look at the idolatry of the Israelites, we sometimes figure it to be quite silly. We always wonder, how could anyone possibly motivate to fashion an idol from a piece of wood, rock, or precious metal, and then worship it? Couldn't they just see that they had made it themselves? What were they really thinking? But to simply misunderstand what idolatry is, idolatry does not simply mean thinking some object is special, such as the golden calf, or a portrait of a now dead grandparent who loved us very much. Rather, it means elevating a part of creation above the Creator. The Israelites, in worshipping the golden calf, elevated the natural forces represented by the calf above the true God, who had created those natural forces. Idolatry is living for the product instead of the producer. It is having the most basic priorities of life out of whack. Perhaps we don't physically bow before computers or TVs or our handphones or iPads. That would be silly. But sometimes we live for these things and many others, elevating them way beyond where they should be. We ask them to fill a role in our lives that only God can and should fill. Naturalism is idolatry because it raises the creation, conceived as an impersonal nature, above the Creator. It does this in one of two ways. Either it erases the Creator altogether, saying that there is no God, or it puts the Creator out of a job, saying that God makes no difference. The naturalist doesn't bow before and pray to his backyard garden, but he raises nature to an improper role, one that only God should fill. The temptation to worship the created world rather than the Creator is ever present. When we forget that God is the Creator, Sustainer, providential guide, and Redeemer of this world, we readily succumb to idolatry. Rather than to thank God, naturalistic scientists will therefore thank nature. The late Harvard evolutionist Stephen Jay Gould is a case in point. Note his remark about the destruction of the dinosaurs. Since dinosaurs were not moving towards remarkably larger brains, and since such a prospect may lie outside the capabilities of a reptilian design, we must assume that the consciousness would not have evolved on our planet if a cosmic catastrophe had not claimed the dinosaurs as victims. In an entirely literal sense, we owe our existence as large and reasoning animals to our lucky stars. In fact, we have no idea how our emergence would have been affected if some dinosaurs had survived the catastrophe. Perhaps the most popular exhibits at zoos would be Jurassic Parks. But what about more serious outcomes? According to Gould, we must assume that consciousness happened by accident and that would not have happened if dinosaurs had not gone extinct. And what does he offer as evidence? Only that dinosaurs were not moving towards larger brains. But then neither were most creatures who survived. Human consciousness is unique, just as the human brain is unique. Gould does not offer a credible explanation for why we owe our existence to our lucky stars. But many people accept his premise without thinking carefully about the poor quality of the evidence that supports it. Scripture uses many words and images to portray idolatry, but the most fitting is foolishness. To engage in idolatry is utter foolishness, but the reality is that we all do it or have done it. Naturalists are not the only ones who commit idolatry. At some point, all of us are guilty of raising creation or some aspect of creation above the Creator. Idolatry is utter foolishness because it elevates what is second best over what is best. An idolater is like a person who, given a chance to drive a Ferrari, preferred to stay home and play with a Matchbox version of it. The creation is awe-inspiring, so we can understand why we fall in love with it. Watching shows on TV like Planet Earth inspires awe. We must be reminded, if creation is so marvelous, how much more marvelous is the one who created it? The creation is good, and even very good, but it is not the best. God is best. In fact, God is so much better than what is second best, that to place Him at the same level as anything else is utter foolishness.